As I mentioned, today's topic is on the subject of friendship, and I'd like to read what Swamiji has written in this Living Wisely, Living Well for today's reading. A true friend is one with whom you can weep, and not only a true friend to all. Let them feel that you care for them. Weep with them, not to increase their sorrow, but to wean them from it altogether. Don't weep for yourself, however. To be a best friend to all, to yourself as well, strive always to find a way out of darkness into light. I think that's a good thing to remember, is when your friends, when others, when they're in times of despair, times of darkness, the tendency sometimes is to think to jump in also into the pit of darkness with them. But really a true friend is somebody who is in the light and tries to uplift our friends into light. And isn't that really what friends do? Of need when you're in times of very well. You a long time and knows you sort of from the inside, not necessarily from what's outside. Somebody you can rely on at that time. That's what friends are about, and that's why perhaps friendship, and more than perhaps, that's why friendship is such a cherished relationship. Paramahansa Yogananda said that of all the various forms of love that we have love from a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, a mother, daughter, a parent, father, son, that of all the various forms that divine love takes in these human expressions, that perhaps, and again, more than perhaps, it's a fact that the most beautiful of those is friendship. The most pure, you might say, of those is friendship, because it's friendship that underlies and is the basis of all the others. Yoganandaji said this. He said, the universal spiritual attraction which unites souls is friendship, is the universal spiritual attraction which unites souls in the bond of divine love. And so what you find is that when the other forms of friendship, let's say parent for a child, there's that natural bond, of course, of love that's right there. But as time goes by, you find that the child grows up into adulthood and the parent perhaps becomes older, and that relationship of mentoring or that relationship of raising a child, it begins to pass away, and what's left? You find that often the case is that the parent and the child, they become friends. That's the basis of their relationship. Also, you see married couples. They start off, perhaps there's a romantic attraction between husband and wife, and they relate on that level as man and woman, but as time goes by, you see people that have been married for a long time. They become old friends, and they're looking together, sitting side by side, looking out at the world as friends. And you see underlying most long-lasting relationships underneath the foundation of good relationships is one of friendships, because after all, over lifetime after lifetime, we have been friends. Yes, but we've been husband, we've been wife, we've been master, we've been servant, we've been teacher, we've been student. All of these relationships from one lifetime to the next lifetime, they change. They're not always in that same outward form of friendship, but underneath all of those relationships that change from one lifetime to the next lifetime, there's always that bond of friendship. And so it's the foundation upon which all of the other relationships that express divine love, it's the foundation upon which all of them are based. And it's said to be the most pure because in perfect expression, there's no expectation. Whereas in the other ones, there's a little bit of, or compulsion, you might say. There's no compulsion because a parent for a child, there's a certain biological compulsion that we have a duty, it's innate that we need to express our love for that child because it's our child. We have to raise that child. And same thing with the child for the parent. But yet, friends, that friendship is a gift that's freely given, one person to another. There's no, in a perfect friendship, there's no expectation or demanded reciprocity back and forth. It's a free gift that one gives to the other. And I think you find that sometimes when you do have expectations, you know that there's a little bit something that has to be purified there, that I demand something of another. We have to remember, friendship is something that's a free gift. And when it's given, it's a beautiful thing, and it's received in a pure way. That understanding that this is a gift, and as a gift, it's something that I should cherish, that each of us should cherish. I look back on my lifetime, and I look back at the different relationships I've had with different people. And I remember all of those people, even from childhood. I remember my best friends growing up, and they're still very dear to me. I haven't seen them perhaps for decades, but yet I still think of them very closely, and I have this sense that if I saw them again, it would just be like old times. And that sometimes I have had, and maybe you've had this experience too. When you had a friendship, perhaps you were teenagers together or children together, playing together, students perhaps in college, and your ways part. You go your different ways, but then you come back and you meet again, perhaps after 20, 30, even 40 years, and it's as if there has been no time. It's just right again. You just pick it up where you left off almost in that way. Now, perhaps that's not always the case, but oftentimes it is. There's somehow that bond. You can feel it right away. And this is something that actually, in the spiritual life, this is something to take seriously, because friendship is not just for you might say, our pleasure or our happiness that comes from it, but it's actually a doorway through which we can grow on the spiritual path. You might say it's one of the most accessible doorways, because everyone can have friends. Now, not necessarily everyone has friends, and that's a shame. It's a pity in a way if somebody does not able to make friends this lifetime. But the opportunity to have friends is there, because with a friend, we can express and learn to express pure love. And that love for a friend can then be expanded, and that sympathy, that feeling of friendship can be then through that channeled through that friendship to begin to include others. And friendship, pure friendship, is this way. It doesn't limit itself to one person, or it's not confined. It's something that's expansive, that other people can be included in. It's inclusive, in other words, and not exclusive. I know that when I was a boy, I was very fortunate in that way, just to be able to have many friends. And I noticed that some people, they tended to have just one or two friends and nobody else. It was like a boundary, you might say. There was a wall or a fence was built around that friendship. Inevitably, those types of friendships, I noticed in time, they don't last, because there's a little something comes up between them and they begin to break down. Whereas they're not, and the reason for that is because they're not expansive. They're not inclusive of other people. And true friendship is something that has open boundaries to include many other people into that circle of friendship. And I think this is how we should use friends and friendship, is to love one another as friends, but ultimately to love everybody as friends, to be able to see everybody as potentially being our friend, and to invite those friends, those strangers who I like to think of, they're not strangers so much as they're just friends that we haven't yet met, or we haven't yet got to know. But if we do recognize somebody, and I think I've noticed this in my life, and I'm going to guess that you have too. Sometimes you meet people and you have this feeling that I've known this person before. It's like you recognize them from somewhere. And if you have that feeling, well, the chances are very good that is a friend from perhaps a past life. The masters say, and Paramahansa Yogananda says, that when you meet such a one, that you have this feeling of past relationship with, this magnetism with, it's good to try to cultivate that friendship and develop it, because something has been established from one lifetime, and it's good to try to cultivate it, to build upon it, to perfect it from human friendship ultimately into divine friendship. And so be on the lookout for those people who you have that sympathetic feeling of friendship with, and then cultivate it, cherish it actually, because it's a divine gift. And little by little, you'll see you begin to bring that out, and it's a beautiful relationship that we can develop in that way. Now, friendship, in that sense, you might say we're picking up a friendship perhaps from lifetimes past that seems to be very natural, but friendship also has to be cultivated. And you could say one of the dangers sometimes of in friendship is taking other friends or taking other people for granted, being indifferent to it, and just not giving some conscious attention to it. And to be indifferent to it is, you'll find that friendship can begin to wither unless it's watered, just like a plant. You have to cultivate it. You have to remove the weeds, the things that are perhaps draining it, and you have to be able to you cultivate it and make it flower. And it's the same thing. It's like with the plant. Same thing with the friendship. Is give it some conscious energy. Look out for it and develop it, because there's something special in our life with friendship, and it opens that door ultimately for divine friendship. There's certain things that you could say that I remember reading when Paramahansa Yogananda wrote an article on friendship, and he says the basis of friendship is being mutually useful. And I thought about that. I thought, well, that seems somewhat a strange way to say it, but in a sense, on a very basic sense, this is one of the truths. By that he meant friends are mutually serviceful to one another. In other words, a friend is somebody who goes out of his way selflessly to help another person. And in that way, one person helps another, and the other one is in reciprocity, helps the other one back. And so if we take that principle, let's think about how can we apply that? How can we be mutually useful to one another, and especially to those people that are our friends? And it means going out of our way to consciously try to be helpful to somebody else, as opposed to what I just mentioned, is to being indifferent, just taking something for granted. These things need to be developed, and as they're developed, they begin to flower, and the magnetism begins to grow, and we perfect through human friendships, we begin to perfect that relationship. And so friends need to be mutually helpful to one another. And isn't it true that when you have a friend that's a person that you can count on, somebody that you know is going to help you, not necessarily somebody who's always going to agree with you? And so I know there are people and usually when you're children, that sometimes childhood friendships are this way. One person, you didn't agree with me. And if you don't agree with me, you won't be my friend. And of course, that's a childish way to approach it. But sometimes those attitudes go into adulthood too. And friends aren't necessarily there to agree with us. They're there to help us. And sometimes the very best help we can get for a friend is to get an honest reflection back about what we're doing. And so consequently, isn't it natural when we're in times of difficulty, times of uncertainty, we go to a friend and we ask, what do you think? What's going on? What's happening here with me? And at that time, if a friend merely just agrees with you, perhaps your delusion or your negativity or whatever it might be, that's not being helpful. A friend needs to be sensitive, yes, to another person. I mean, obviously, you need to be diplomatic at times, but nevertheless, you're there to help, to uplift. And this is what Swami was saying here in this reading, is, as he said, be there, as I'll read it again. He says, to be a best friend to all, to yourself as well, strive always to find a way out of darkness into light, not just for ourselves, but of course with our friends. Try to lift up one another into the light and to be there at those times. And the way, when light is needed, and the way to do that, of course, is to try to be in the light ourselves. This is what friends are for. I think also, if we look at friendship, one of the very foundation principles of what it means to be a friend, to be a good friend, is to be loyal. Loyalty is what Paramahansa Yogananda said is the first law of God. Is, in other words, to be there, to be loyal to a friend. Now, some people interpret this, and they wrongly interpret this as, again, going back to, well, if to be loyal to my friend is to agree with my friend in his delusion, or perhaps in the error of his ways is to condone that, and that's loyalty. No, loyalty is not that. We have to realize that what each of us are trying to do as individual souls is we're trying little by little, lifetime by lifetime, striving toward the light. And striving toward the light, not just by ourselves. It's somewhat of a spiritual law that we're not going to be able to uplift ourselves just by ourselves without also including the welfare of others. And so we do not raise ourselves into the light in isolation. We have to also expand our sympathies to include other people so that we all together, we raise ourselves up into the light, or at least move together in that direction. And so if we understand that this direction of moving toward the light is our individual goal, we then look out for one another to help other people to also move to that light. And so consequently, we need to be loyal to our friends, loyal in the sense of what is the highest welfare for myself, but also in the same way, what's the highest welfare for other people, and particularly for my friends? And that is for them too to move to the light. So this doesn't mean, loyalty does not mean agreement. It means working together to move toward the light. And sometimes you have to give advice to a friend that may not be always superficially welcomed. But on a soul level, in the long run, we realize that this is what we're trying to do, is each together move to the light. And so you try to help them. Now, obviously, you have to, when you're giving advice or you're helping a friend who's in a time of struggle, a time of need, perhaps not even, they've gone astray, you have to be diplomatic, and you have to find what's going to help move this person, my friend, in the right direction. But underneath it all, in times of struggle and strife, you need to be loyal. You need to be there for that person when the time comes when that person's in a time of difficulty. And that means also a willingness to sacrifice your own self for a friend. Isn't that what Christ says? The one who would lay down his life for that of a friend. This is what true friendship and true love really is to not see, is to be willing to sacrifice oneself for another, because that other is really ourselves, simply in another form, in another body. So when this friendship is perfected, it's just such a beautiful relationship. And I think if you look at the life of the great masters, you look at the life of our guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, you see that when he came to America, his friendship with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, of course, was a disciple, but also on a human level, he was able to fulfill that role of a friend. In the same way, even with Rajasi, his great disciple, Rajasi Janakananda, you could see that there's that wonderful picture of them together, just looking at each other. It was sort of a human love, but you could see them looking into each other's eyes. There was a deep love of God being able to see in one another. But outwardly they were like young boys enjoying the friendship of another soul that was in God and could relate on that deep spiritual level with one another. And this, you see this, and I think if you look in the life of Swami Kriyananda, my teacher, that one of the he would write, the signature, when he would give his signature, he'd write notes and letters to other people. He would always sign his name, Swami Kriyananda, but that he would always say, "In divine friendship." And that was the relationship that he had with the people that knew him. I met him, and when I first met him, I was a young man. I was in 22, and he was 20 years older than I was. And so there was this age difference. And so I never could feel, in a sense, I was never, you might say, a buddy friend type friend. He was of another generation above me. But I always felt I had deep respect. And there was always that certain, respectfulness of a teacher to a student. But yet underneath it all, I always felt that he was looking out for my welfare, and if the time would come when I needed a hand in anything, he'd be there for me. And there was often times in my life when things weren't going always to my satisfaction, that perhaps difficulties, things that I was having difficulties of this or that, and I would write him a letter, and he was always very pointed in his replies to me. But yet I could see when I would see him, and sometimes he would look at me, and underneath it I could see there was this divine friendship, that he was there, and he was very, very loyal. This is one of the things that I noticed in him, that even people with whom outwardly he disagreed, people that perhaps were not, and perhaps did not feel affectionate toward him, if he had become their friend, it was never he who abandoned that friendship. Sometimes people walked away from him, but he would never walk away from another. He was always open for that friendship to return and be there. And that was a very important relationship for him. And seeing that expressed in his life strengthened in me that, yes, this is something that we need to cultivate. And we need to make sacrifices and be willing to make sacrifices to maintain that relationship. So if you look into your life, identify those people. Most people, I don't think, have crowds and crowds of friends. I think everybody's our friend on some degree, but I know all of us have, to some degree, certain special people in our life that we have this relationship we feel that has come from the past. Look into that relationship and try to cultivate that aspect of friendship. There's no expectation or not selfishness, a purity there underneath that relationship, and try to cultivate that. Put energy into it. Sometimes friendship is not always reciprocated. That's okay. You make the effort, and you'll find little by little it'll begin to flower, and you'll be the one who benefits. If you put out the effort for friendship, you'll find that in multiple ways people will support you when the time comes, but you'll find that your life just becomes a garden. It flowers when you have this garden of friendship of souls. Give it thought. Give it thought. This is, I know I looked in my life, and this is, you might say, the foundation of all of my relationships, that looking back, that I hold dear. And friendship is truly, it is the foundation of all spiritual relationships. Many blessings to you.